Richard Dawkins has spent 50 years telling the world that faith means believing things without evidence. Here is the uncomfortable irony: his most influential claims rest on exactly that. Today we are going to do to Dawkins what he insists on doing to everyone else: we are going to follow the evidence. Dawkins is a genuinely significant figure in the history of science communication. The selfish gene in 1976 changed how millions of people understood evolution. The gene-centric view he popularized, that evolution is best understood from the gene's perspective rather than the organism's, was a real conceptual advance, building on W.D. Hamilton and George Williams. For that book and for the extended phenotype he deserves serious credit. But then something went wrong. The scientist retreated and the ideologue advanced. And that is where our story actually begins. Dawkins's master move is a vertical one. He drills down to the genetic level and then pretends the view from down there explains everything above it. Religion, a misfiring of adaptive modules; altruism, ultimately illusory; morality, an adaptive confection. The problem is that you cannot explain away a skyscraper by describing the atoms in its foundation. Each level of organization has properties that are simply not visible from below, what systems theorists call emergence. Dawkins knows this in biology, he ignores it everywhere else. When he reduces the history of religious institutions, theology, social cohesion, and metaphysical inquiry to misfiring neurons shaped by Pleistocene selection pressures, he has not explained religion. He has changed the subject and called it an explanation. Here is the most important sentence in the God delusion: there almost certainly is no God. Read that carefully. That is not a scientific finding. There is no experiment, no observation, no measurement that produces that result. The existence of a non-material ground of being is not a falsifiable empirical hypothesis. It is a metaphysical claim. Dawkins knows this, which is why his actual argument relies on probability aesthetics and parsimony preferences, not data. What he has done is borrow the epistemic authority of evolutionary biology, which is genuinely robust and well-evidenced, and laundered it into a metaphysical conclusion that the science does not support. This is exactly the move he accuses theologians of making. He is just doing it in the opposite direction. Ask Dawkins what happens when you remove religion from a society, and he will gesture vaguely at reason and science filling the gap. What he will not do is model it, because doing so seriously would require engaging with religion as a systemic phenomenon, a load-bearing structure in social cohesion, norm enforcement, psychological resilience, institutional welfare, and collective meaning-making. Removing it is not subtraction, it is structural surgery on a live organism. Dawkins has no theory of what fills the void, no engagement with the historical track record of secular ideologies attempting to do so, and no model of second-order effects. He assumes the answer is obviously benign and moves on. That is not rationalism. That is wishful thinking with good vocabulary. The selfish gene is one of the most seductive and destructive metaphors in modern intellectual history. Dawkins introduces it with a careful disclaimer: it is a metaphor, genes are not literally selfish, and then writes 300 pages that depend on you forgetting that disclaimer. Selfish means something. It means agency, intention, interest, goal-directedness. Genes have none of these things. By using that word, Dawkins smuggles a folk psychological framework into a domain that explicitly excludes intention, and the result is a generation of people who think evolution is purposeful, that organisms are somehow being used, that competition is nature's deep truth. The meme concept is even worse. It borrows Darwinian precision for cultural transmission while lacking any of the physical substrate that makes genetics tractable. No chromosome. No replication fidelity. No mutation rate. Strip away the analogy, and there is nothing left. Dawkins gave the world a metaphor that feels like a mechanism and is not. In the God delusion, the historical case against religion follows a consistent pattern: Find the worst available example, present it as representative, ignore the baseline. The Crusades, the Inquisition, suicide bombers, child abuse. Dawkins presents this selection as if it settles the empirical question. It does not. The relevant question is, compared to what? He never seriously constructs the counterfactual. He never engages the historical record of secular ideological violence, the scale of which dwarfs religious violence in the 20th century alone. And he never acknowledges more than in passing that abolitionism, early feminism, and the civil rights movement were substantially powered by religious conviction. Cherry-picking is not empiricism. It is advocacy dressed as analysis. Dawkins is quite certain about what religious experience is: a neurological misfiring, a cognitive illusion, an evolutionary side effect. He is equally certain about what his own sense of awe and wonder is: a byproduct of selection. Here is the problem. Identifying the neural correlates of an experience tells you nothing whatsoever about the truth or significance of its content. This is the hard problem of consciousness, and it remains genuinely unsolved, not because scientists have not tried, but because the gap between third-person descriptions of brain states and first-person phenomenological facts is not obviously closable. Dawkins dismisses this problem with impatience. He does not solve it. He waves at it and keeps walking. For a man who insists on intellectual rigor, that is a remarkable gap. Richard Dawkins built his reputation on a simple, powerful demand: show your evidence, examine your assumptions, follow the argument wherever it leads. It is a good demand. The tragedy is that he stopped applying it to himself sometime around 2006. What remains is a man who mistakes fluency for rigor, confidence for competence, and the borders of his expertise for the borders of all knowledge. The rationalist who cannot locate his own blind spots is not a defender of reason. He is its most convincing impersonator, and that, in the end, is a far more interesting problem than anything he ever said about God.